There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable, easy to miss, right before everything changes. No siren announces it. No headline marks it in advance. It arrives disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, an ordinary decision, an ordinary breath before the next step. And yet, looking back, we will call it the turning point. We will say, that was where it began. This is the story of that moment. Not one moment, in truth, but thousands of them, scattered across history, science, and the quiet corners of everyday life. Each one a hinge on which something larger swung open. Because the truth is this: what happens next could change everything. It always could. It always has. We like to imagine that the biggest moments in history arrived with warning, that the people living through them somehow sensed the ground shifting beneath their feet. But almost without exception, the opposite is true. The people closest to a turning point are usually the last to recognize it as one. They are too busy living inside the moment to see its shape from the outside. It is only later, when we assemble the pieces into a story, that the moment gains its significance. History, in this sense, is written backward. We know where the story ends, and so we go looking for the beginning, and we almost always find it hiding in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary. This is the story of those disguises, of the ordinary moments that turned out to be extraordinary, and of what that pattern might mean for the moment we are standing in right now. Throughout history, civilizations have leaned on the illusion of stability. We build cities as if they will stand forever. We plan decades ahead as if the ground beneath us is fixed. But history tells a different story, one of sudden turns, of thresholds crossed without warning. Consider the printing press. Before it, ideas traveled at the speed of a walking man, a horse, a ship crossing dark water. A single machine, built from metal type and stubborn ambition, changed the velocity of human was unrecognizable. Kings lost their monopoly on truth. Ordinary people began T.O. Reed, to question, to imagine a world authored by more than a few powerful hands, or consider a smaller, quieter turning point. The discovery of penicillin. A scientist, distracted, notices a strange mold contaminating a petri dish he'd meant to discard. He almost throws it away. He does not. And in that small hesitation, in that decision to look closer instead of moving on, millions of future lives are quietly, invisibly saved. These are the stories we remember. But for every remembered turning point, there are countless unremembered ones. Decisions made in silence, forks in the road that only become visible when we trace the path backward. That is the strange nature of change. It rarely announces itself. It reveals its significance only in hindsight. Think, too, of the first flight at Kitty Hawk, 12 seconds, 120 feet. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like nothing at all. A fragile wooden frame stumbling a few feet above the sand. There was no crowd, no fanfare, no sense that history had just shifted its weight. Two brothers, a handful of witnesses, a cold December wind, and yet within a single human lifetime, that 12-second stumble became transcontinental flight, space travel, satellites circling the Earth. The seed of an entire century was planted in a moment almost too small to notice. Or think of a courtroom in the American South, a moment when a small girl walked up a set of school steps flanked by federal marshals, while a crowd screamed on the other side of a police line to the girl herself. But it was also the visible edge of a much larger, slower turning point. Decades of struggle compressed into a single photographed walk. The turning point wasn't only that morning. It was every quiet act of courage that made that morning possible, and everyone that followed it. History, in other words, is not made only of the moments we photograph. It is made of the thousands of unphotographed moments that lead up to them, the quiet accumulation of courage, curiosity, and stubbornness that eventually breaks the surface where we can finally see it. Scientists have a name for this phenomenon, the tipping point, a threshold beyond which a system doesn't just grow, it transforms. Think of water heating on a stove. For a long time, nothing dramatic happens. The temperature rises, degree by degree, and the 8E water simply warms. Then, almost without warning, it boils. The same steady process suddenly produces an entirely different state of being. Ecosystems work this way, economies work this way. Even the human brain, in moments of insight, seems to cross some invisible threshold. A slow accumulation of thought that suddenly, in an instant, becomes understanding. Researchers studying complex systems have found this pattern again and again. Change is rarely linear. It creeps, and then it leaps. This is both a warning and a promise. A warning because it means danger can build unnoticed beneath a calm surface. A warming climate, a fraying institution, a quiet erosion of trust. And a promise because it means transformation is often closer than it appears. The tipping point may be nearer than we think. Consider the coral reef. For years it can absorb stress, rising temperatures, changing acidity, human interference, without any visible sign of damage. It looked S from the surface, exactly as it always has. And then, seemingly overnight, it bleaches. White, lifeless, a graveyard where a living city used to be. The damage wasn't sudden, it was cumulative. The collapse was simply the first moment the damage became visible. The same logic applies to financial systems. In the years before a market crash, the signs are often present, quietly, in spreadsheets and risk models, long before the public feels anything. Confidence holds the system together, right up until the moment it doesn't. Economists sometimes describe this as a Minsky moment, a point where stability itself breeds the very fragility that undoes it. Everything looks fine, until all at once it isn't. Even in physics, we see this pattern echoed. A single grain of sand added to a growing pile seems inconsequential. Then one more grain, indistinguishable from the 1,000 before it, triggers an avalanche. Scientists call this self-organized criticality. Systems that organize themselves quietly toward the very edge of collapse, so that the smallest addition can trigger the largest consequence. What unites the coral reef, the market, and the sand pile is this: the moment of visible change is never the true cause of that change. It is only the final note in a much longer, quieter song. Part 3. The human moment. But turning points are not only found in history books and laboratories. They live inside individual lives, in moments so personal they rarely make the news. A person standing at a crossroads, a job offer, a diagnosis, a phone call that changes everything, a conversation that shifts the direction of a relationship. A single choice, made in an ordinary kitchen or a hospital hallway, that quietly redirects the rest of a life. We often don't recognize these moments while we're living them. It's only later, looking back, that we see the hinge, the place where one version of our life ended and another began. Psychologists call these turning point narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about the moments that shaped who we became. And what's fascinating is this: the moment itself is often small. It's the meaning we build around it, afterward, that makes it monumental. This suggests something important. We are not just witnesses to change. We are its authors, even when we don't realize we're writing. Think of the countless small moments that precede a single large one. A person doesn't wake up one day and simply become a different version of themselves. They make one decision to try something new, then another. A conversation here, a book read there, a friendship that quietly reshapes how they see the world. None of these moments like Tuesday. And yet, stitched together, they form the narrative arc of an entire life. There's a reason so many people, when asked about the most important moment of their lives, describe something that seemed insignificant at the time. A teacher who said one encouraging sentence in a hallway. A stranger's small kindness on a difficult day. A door that happened to be open when they needed somewhere to walk through. We rarely recognize these moments as turning points because they don't arrive with music swelling in the background. They arrive quietly, almost apologetically, and it is only the passage of time that reveals their true weight. This is perhaps the most human truth hidden inside the idea of turning points. Significance is not something moments possess on their own. It is something we build gradually through the choices we make in response to them. The moment itself is raw material. What we do with it is the story. We live in an age that feels perched on the edge of transformation. Technology is advancing at a pace few of us can fully track at K. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how we work, create, and even think. The climate is shifting beneath our feet, its patterns no longer matching the world our grandparents knew. Political and social structures that once felt permanent are being tested, questioned, rebuilt. It would be easy to feel like a passenger in all of this, swept along by forces too large to influence. But history suggests otherwise. Every great shift was made of small decisions, multiplied across millions of people, accumulating quietly until the moment they became undeniable. The printing press didn't change the world by itself. It changed the world because people chose to read, to write, to question, to share. The turning point was the machine, but the transformation was made of human choices, layered one on top of another. We are right now living inside one of those slow accumulations. We may not know yet which small decisions will prove decisive. We rarely do in the moment, but we are making them anyway, in how we treat each other, in what we choose to build, and what we refuse to accept. Look closely at any major shift underway today, and you find the same pattern repeating. Renewable energy did not arrive as a single dramatic invention. It arrived through thousands of incremental improvements, a slightly more efficient solar cell here, a slightly cheaper battery there, until, one day, the numbers quietly crossed a line, and what had been a fringe technology became the cheapest form of new electricity in much of the world. No headline captured the exact moment it happened, because there wasn't one. There was only the long, patient accumulation, and then the sudden visibility of what had already been built. The same is true of the conversations we're having right now about artificial intelligence, about the boundaries between human creativity and machine assistance, about what it means to think, to write, to create. In an age when the tools themselves are learning to do these things alongside us, we stand, once again, at one of those thresholds where the outcome is not yet fixed. The technology itself is neutral, a tool shaped by the hands that hold it. And what it becomes, a force for connection or division, for empowerment or replacement, depends on the accumulated weight of millions of small choices being made right now in boardrooms and classrooms and quiet home offices by people who may never think of themselves as historic actors. That is the uncomfortable, empowering truth at the center of every turning point. It is never made by one person alone, and yet it is always made in part by every person who is present. So what happens next? The honest answer is we don't fully know. No one ever does, standing at the threshold. The scientist with the contaminated petri dish didn't know he held the future of medicine in his hands. The printer-setting metal type didn't know he was dismantling the old order of knowledge. The person picking up the phone, saying yes instead of no, rarely knows they are stepping through a door that will not open again. But uncertainty is not the same as powerlessness. If history teaches us anything, it's that the moments before change are the moments that matter most. Not because we can predict what's coming, but because our choices, made honestly and with clear eyes, shape what that change becomes. There is a particular kind of humility required here. The humility to admit that we are, all of us, working with incomplete information, standing at a threshold we cannot fully see over. The temptation in moments like this is to wait, to hold back until the picture becomes clearer, until the risk feels smaller, until certainty arrives to reassure us. But certainty rarely arrives before the turning point. It arrives after, dressed up as inevitability, as though the outcome had been obvious all along. The people who shape turning points are rarely the ones who waited for certainty. They are the ones who acted with the best information available, adjusted as they learned more, and kept moving even when the destination remained unclear. The scientist who almost discarded the contaminated dish had no way of knowing he was looking at the future of medicine. He simply chose curiosity over convenience, attention over dismissal. That choice, S-L, quiet, easily overlooked, is the same choice available to any of us in any ordinary moment if we are willing to make it. There's a temptation when talking about turning points to imagine them as the property of the extraordinary. Scientists, inventors, leaders, people whose names end up in books. But this misses something essential about how change actually works. Every large movement in history was built from ordinary people making ordinary decisions, day after day, without any guarantee that those decisions would matter. The farmer who decided to share what he knew with his neighbor, the parent who decided to answer a difficult question honestly instead of deflecting it, the employee who decided to speak up in a meeting despite the risk of being wrong. None of these people thought of themselves as agents of historic change. They were simply trying to do the right thing in the moment in front of them. And yet, multiplied across enough people, across enough moments, these small decisions become the invisible architecture of everything that follows. We tend to study history by looking at its monuments, the treaties signed, the battles fought, the inventions unveiled. But monuments are built from bricks, and the bricks are made of ordinary days. This is perhaps the most quietly radical idea contained in the phrase, "What happens next could change everything." It does not require us to become extraordinary. It only requires us to take the ordinary moment in front of us seriously, to recognize that it might be one of the bricks, even if we never learn which wall it ends up supporting. The mold in the petri dish needed someone to look closer. The printing press needed people willing to read. The tipping point needed the steady, patient accumulation of small things, done consistently, before it became visible to anyone at all. Perhaps that is the real lesson hidden inside every turning point in history, that the moment which changes everything rarely looks important while it's happening. It looks like an ordinary choice, an ordinary act of attention, an ordinary refusal to look away, which means the next great turning point may not be waiting somewhere far in the future. It may be sitting quietly in front of us, disguised as something small. If we accept this, that turning points rarely announce themselves, that they hide inside ordinary moments, that they are built more often than they are discovered, then a different way of living begins to suggest itself. It means paying closer attention to the moments we might otherwise rush past, the conversation we almost didn't have, the idea we almost dismissed too quickly, the small act of care we almost didn't offer because WE were busy, distracted, certain it wouldn't matter. Not every one of these moments will turn out to be significant. Most, statistically, will not. But we rarely know in advance which ones will, and that uncertainty is precisely why attention matters so much. It also means becoming more comfortable with not knowing. The scientists studying tipping points cannot always predict exactly when a system will cross its threshold, only that thresholds exist and that they tend to arrive faster than expected, once the underlying pressure has built for long enough. The same is true of our own lives, our institutions, our shared future. We may not know exactly when the next great shift will arrive. But we can know with some confidence that the pressure is building somewhere in ways not yet visible on the surface. And finally, it means recognizing our own quiet agency in all of this. We are not merely waiting for history to happen to us. We are, in ways large and small, writing it through the choices we make, the attention we offer, the courage we find in ordinary moments that will only reveal their significance later, if at all. We began by saying there is a moment right before everything changes. Quiet, unremarkable, easy to miss. We have traveled since then through the printing presses and petri dishes of history, through coral reefs and sand piles and financial markets, through hallways where small kindnesses reshaped entire lives, through the slow accumulation of renewable energy and the uncertain frontier of artificial intelligence. Different stories, different centuries, different scales entirely. And yet, the same pattern repeating itself again and again. Change builds quietly in the dark, long before it becomes visible in the light. Perhaps it has already begun. Perhaps it's beginning now, in this very instant, in a decision none of us have noticed yet. A conversation somewhere, an idea taking its first uncertain shape, a small act of attention that will one day be looked back on as the moment everything shifted. We will not know most likely until much later. That has always been the nature of turning points. They are rarely visible from the inside. It is only from a distance, looking back across the years, that the pattern becomes clear enough to name. But knowing this changes something, even now. It means the ordinary moment in front of us, this one, right now, carries more weight than it appears to. It means the small decision we are about to make, the one that feels too minor to matter, might be exactly the kind of decision that turning points are made of. What happens next could change everything. It always could. It always has. And somewhere, quietly, without fanfare, it always will. The only question that remains is what we choose to do about it.